Kageno is an ugly loser who dreams of being some OP vigilante and trains day and night to make it come true. However, even after becoming an MMI star and beating the crap out of local thugs each night, he realizes he has limits. Like if a nuclear war were ever to break out, his edgy ass would be smoked in a second. This changes when Truck-kun intervenes and he gets iseki'd into a fantasy land as an overpowered Dark Lord with a harem of hot girls who are all way down bad for him. Before this, Kageno is still living his first life as an emo-coded NPC, yet there's this certified pick-me girl, Akane, who would always try to befriend him, despite him clearly showing no interest. She did this because Kageno was the only one at school who didn't practically worship her, and since she was a pretty well-known actress and a filthy rich spoiled bitch, this didn't sit well with her. In reality, however, her people-pleasing antics stemmed from a trauma she suffered as a child actress some years ago when she got kidnapped by some thugs and was assaulted. Now, with her PTSD, she tries to play everyone's dream girl so she can hide her own bitterness behind her smile. One night, after spending the entire day working on the upcoming school festival, Akane waited for her driver to pick her up, only for him to never show. With no other option left, she walked back home, something the primetime princess hadn't done since the kidnapping incident. What she didn't know was that her poor driver was getting his ass handed to him by some gangsters somewhere while another crew was sent to collect her. Soon enough, Akane was surrounded too, and while the thugs knocked her out with a chemical-soaked handkerchief, she caught a glimpse of Kageno who was out on his nightly criminal hunting stroll. When she came to, Akane found herself in an abandoned building where the kidnappers promised they'd let her go as soon as they received ransom money from her deep-pocketed parents. However, things soon got out of hand when one of those thugs decided he wanted a taste of Akane, and slapped her for resisting, triggering all her past traumas. However, just as she began crying, Kageno, with no hesi, made a heroic entrance and introduced himself as the stylish ruffian slayer.
What a joker!
True to his lame-ass name, Kageno quickly dealt with the first of them. However, the next guy proved to be more of a challenge. This Giga Chad turned out to be ex-military, which weirdly turned on Kageno as he had always wanted to fight a real soldier. As their fight began, this veteran initially took the offensive, using a dagger, but Kageno eventually showed him why he was the protagonist by using a pair of crowbars to restructure his already ugly face. With both of them toast, Kageno freed Akane and vanished, only to wallow in his misery and lack of strength later. Meanwhile, Akane's rich parents covered up the incident, and no one would ever discover that the masked vigilante was Kageno. The next day, when Akane greeted him, Kageno actually used her correct name, meaning he finally acknowledged her as a person. However, since this wasn't a rom-com, their budding relationship died within numbered days as Kageno got into an accident and lost his life. And by the lords of Isekai, Kageno was reincarnated into a fantasy world with unparalleled magic power, and a harem of hot elf girls who strangely swallow up every crazy-ass idea he makes up on the spot. Now, as the mastermind behind an underworld crime-hunting organization, Kageno has finally become the wannabe vigilante working in the shadows he had always wanted to be, and decides to play the background character to hide his true identity and strength. In this parallel universe, Kageno was born to a hot mama and a loser dad in a family that trained dark knights for the kingdom. He even had an elder sister who was drastically stronger than him, but only for the show since the real MVP had always been him, hiding in the shadows and wreaking havoc upon any low-level thugs who dared to cross his path. Kageno's new power provided him with a slimy body coat that he could shape-shift into weapons and practically anything that he wanted, and he used it to dispatch bandits like he was playing a video game. He mostly did it for the money because in this economy, who wouldn't?
I can't eat! I'm broke, nigga! I'm broke!
Anyway, during one of his usual night hunts, Kageno came across a weirdly disgusting blob of meat and decided to use it as his punching bag for as long as it would last. However, while he was doing so, this blob of meat turned into a hot-as-hell elf one day and he immediately changed his course of action. As this chick came back to her senses, Kageno flashed an edgy pose and pretended to be some overlord who had just saved her from a curse.
Look at this dude.
He further fed her some made-up BS about a demon lord Diablo whose subjects turned her into a slimy monster because she was one of the 3 descendants of the heroes that put the demon lord away. Seeing that this plateful of crap was being swallowed, Kageno took a step forward and updated his name from the wannabe ruffian slayer to Shadow and invited her to join his cult to hunt Diablo. The dumb elf, whom he named Alpha, immediately believed him and swore her allegiance to him. From then onward, Kageno's ad-libbing won him simp after simp, and he eventually turned them into his personalized fan club called the Shadow Garden. Meanwhile, he continued to cosplay as a pathetic loser by always failing in front of his elder sister, Claire, who always believed herself to be better than him. Later, as she turned 15, Claire was supposed to be sent to the Academy of Dark Knights. However, on the day of her departure, she went missing. Kageno's harem deduced it was the doing of Diablo's cult that must have mistook Claire for the descendant of a hero, while Kageno himself thought his brainwashing was making them take every local thug for a cult member. Either way, his Oscar-worthy performances help him play along, and his gang decides to locate and hunt the kidnappers that night. Meanwhile, Claire, who is being held captive, gets weirdly outraged when the kidnapper mentions going after Kageno, finally revealing her bro-con colors. Then the kidnapper simply knocks her out and reveals he wants to test her blood for a ritual, only for his grand scheme to get spoiled by Kageno and company's entrance. It turns out that Kageno's ad-libbed stories seem to have manifested, and that these roided-up jocks are members of Diablo's cult, trying to revive their leader. The team makes quick work of the kidnappers, then watch Alpha face off with their ponytail leader. He is no match for Alpha's sword, so he red pills up, but his swordplay does not improve. So he flees the scene, only to face Kageno in his all-black drip on a lower floor. He easily dodges the attacks of this 6-foot-something militant, and with a few slashes of his sword, draws a jigsaw puzzle on him. The kidnapper gets even more juiced on his power-amping pills, but even after going full Super Saiyan, he still falls to Kageno. Later, Claire returns home on her own and sets out to the Night Academy the very next day. With her gone, Kageno believes he can finally relax a little, only for him to receive a surprise rug pull when Alpha and the girls reveal they have decided to part ways with him and pursue their individual interests. Kageno wonders when his riz started to fizzle, but the girls promise to still be connected to him as long as they are after Diablo and the cult. A few years pass and Kageno travels to the capital to enroll at the night school as well. However, since he still needs to continue playing the role of a loser, he tries his hardest to stay away from the limelight. He stays at the shabbiest dorm, befriends the lamest of weebs in existence, and makes weird bets to embarrass himself and uphold his background character image. One morning, his friends force him to keep his word and pay the penalty for losing a bet, which involves confessing his love to the school's it girl, Princess Alexia, who has never agreed to date anyone and has trampled on the ego of anyone who dared to confess to her. Kageno's masochistic ass confesses to her while stuttering and spitting. However, his grand scheme ends in true disaster when she actually says yes to him and reroutes him to the path of a rom-com protagonist. His friends are just as surprised at where he got all this riz from. The following day, Alexia even joins them for lunch, and thanks to her deep pockets, the cheapsteaks get to taste meat for the first time in a while. Kageno, who wants her to dump him so he can revert to his old, insignificant life, gobbles it all up, only to find that she's rather enjoying the sight. Later, she drags him to her fencing lessons where Zenon, the head of the Royal Knights, is the instructor. He preaches to them some crap about fighting for the greater good, but Kageno is rather focused on Alexia's peculiar style of sword fighting. He notices that she sticks to the basics and has nothing all that great about her technique, something that he likes. Later, he overhears a conversation between her and Zenon and realizes they are arranged to be wed. Deducing that the bitch is merely two-timing him to annoy Zenon, Kageno tries to break it off with her, only to learn the rats he has for friends have already snitched about their bet and his fake confession. Alexia tries to threaten him into staying as her side piece, but none of her strong words work nearly as well as her shimmering gold coins. For these, Kageno wiggles his tail like her faithful dog. From then on, even though everyone calls him a gold digger, Kageno sticks to Alexia's side to offset inflation, which is just stupid these days, but it begins to piss off Zenon. Later, as she continues to rant about him on the train, Kageno quietly listens to her but later asks why she doesn't want to marry him despite him being perfect partner material. Alexia says he's far too perfect, which makes her sus of whether he's hiding some major flaws or is just plain psychotic. A few days later, on their way back home, Alexia trash talks Kageno's fencing style and calls it plain, but Kageno says he likes her style despite hers being just as plain and uninteresting. This triggers her for some reason, and after bitching about how she's always wanted to be as great as her prodigal sister, and that she hates his guts, Alexia gets off the train. However, karma catches up to her and she gets kidnapped on her way home. The next day, Zenon grabs up Kageno as the prime suspect of her kidnapping, something he doesn't even resist. Meanwhile, Alexia finds herself locked in a prison cell somewhere, right next to a weird, ugly creature. Just as she's beginning to suspect it was Kageno's doing, a mad scientist walks in, thirsting for her royal blood. Upon being questioned, he reveals he'll be using it to resurrect the Demon King. On the other hand, Zenon's cocky henchmen start smacking up Kageno something serious, but his sadistic ass is rather pleased about it. In fact, since both these small fries seem exceptionally dumb, Kageno tries to compete with them in a battle of who can act more stupid. Back in the Nutjob's lab, he fails to drain enough blood from Alexia, and takes it out on the ugly creature in the next cell, only for Alexia to bring his attention back to her to deflect the heat. This doesn't age well since he then makes her eat literal vomit, which snuffs her wannabe humanitarian activism quickly. At the academy, Zenon meets with Alexia's elder sister, Iris, who is the princess of the state, and they talk strategy to locate and rescue her sister. The Brokon, on the other hand, has a mental breakdown upon learning about Kageno's capture, and tries hard to leave the dormitory to rescue her brother. A few evenings later, after Kageno is set free, he notices a few sus men tailing him home, only for Alpha to quietly take care of them. She later greets Kageno in his bedroom and reveals that she came back as soon as she learned that he was in trouble. Kageno, who never expected to see her again, is surprised to learn she's still working on extending his shadow garden, and is taken aback even more when she deduces Alexia was captured by the demonic cult too. Alpha's simping doesn't stop here, and she quietly lays him down, begins to strip him, and asks about his romance with Alexia, something she's clearly salty about. However, she quietly leaves when he explains it was only for show, and she informs him Beta will be coming to meet him soon. To greet Beta, he breaks out all the fancy oil paintings and fine wine he has procured from his side hustle as a thief and faithful dog, and it works wonders when she walks into his dorm and hears him talking in his deep, Batman voice. The simp is instantly hot and bothered to witness Kageno in his flawless drip and reveals that she and the rest of his girlies plan a full-scale assault on the cult tonight. Later, as he kickstarts this self-imposed mission, two more of Zenon's men try to frame him by planting Alexia's scent all over him, only for Kageno to mop the floor with their butts, something Beta takes note of. As Kageno's cult begins its mission, so does Iris's team, and they both try to pin down Alexia's location. Back in the dungeon, the mad scientist returns to Alexia's cell and injects the entity with her blood, hoping to awaken the demon lord. However, this Frankenstein experiment fails and the entity turns into a bloodthirsty monster instead, who first and foremost splatters him like smashing a ripe tomato. Surprisingly, she doesn't hurt Alexia and instead breaks her chains, before heading out to the city to play Godzilla, arriving in Tokyo. Later, as Alexia steps out of the prison cell, she's disgusted to find Zenon's smug face and realizes he's the one who kidnapped and tortured her. And yet, since he knows how to push her buttons, he compares her inferior blood to that of Iris, which blows her fuse. But since this isn't Naruto, her emo amped power-up doesn't work. Alexia loses her fight against Zenon. Knowing she's Alexia prays for a miracle, and the miracle arrives in the form of Kageno. After his long-winded villain speech, Kageno makes his appearance and Zenon immediately recognizes him as the masked vigilante who hunts at night. Thinking he's someone, Zenon arrogantly belittles Kageno and charges at him. However, Kageno makes him eat his words. As this meathead stares back at him with his mouth gaping open, the elf-coated Hulk thing breaks free and wreaks havoc in the city. The measly knights under Iris's command try to hold her back, only to be swatted away like mere flies. Iris plays the hero and slashes through the monster, only to realize it can heal itself even after losing an entire limb. This joke of a princess then tries to dice it up to keep it from regenerating itself. However, even that fails and forces Alpha to intervene. This elven queen immediately sees that the monster wants to be exorcised and uses one swift move to completely obliterate it, setting it free. With the monster gone and Alpha victorious, Iris becomes a certified elf simp and asks for her IG handle, but Alpha tells her to just sit back and enjoy the show.
Rejected!
In the tunnels below, Kageno and Zenon begin their battle, and Zenon talks himself into a power-up, but Kageno defends it with nearly no effort. After sidestepping Zenon and knocking him on his butt, they resume the battle, which becomes a flurry. The resulting exchange of blows makes Alexia realize that despite being extremely powerful, Kageno's technique is masterful, yet very plain and straightforward, similar to hers. Kageno knocks him down again, and after a brief "We are Shadow Garden" speech, Z gets all jacked on some of those roid pills, going all Super Saiyan and calling himself the Chosen One. Still, Kageno smacks him up a bit and easily defeats him. Then Kageno decides to flex his ultimate atomic level attack and annihilate him. As the flash from his attack shines all over the city, his whole harem fangirls across the city. Alexia, now alone, swings a sword around now that Zenon is obliterated and Kageno is nowhere to be seen. Soon, her useless sister arrives and embraces her, glad to find her alive, and the two put their family issues to bed. The next day, Alexia meets up with Kageno at school and thanks him for praising her fencing style, and with blushing cheeks, asks if they can continue to date for a little longer. Our Giga Chad brutally rejects her, which she seems to handle like a champ, but then blood flies. Meanwhile, Kageno's harem, who are still misty from his dashing power moves, discusses the pressing issue of a bad actor claiming to be Shadow Garden and decides to put a stop to it. On the other hand, Iris, who suspects Zenon's involvement in Alexia's abduction, creates a separate order of knights, independent of those working under him. In addition, she uncovers a relic that she claims would lead her to Diablo's cult, and to decipher this, an airhead Pinkette joins their school. On her first day, however, she crashes against Kageno, who has just survived Alexia's wrath and falls in love at first sight.
Hey, that was weird.
Over the next few days, masked vigilantes unalive people all over town in the name of Shadow Garden, while Kageno swears to his cultured friends that he's still a virgin after his breakup becomes official. The lame guys eventually force him to come along with them to visit a local superstore, which is the city's hot new thing. Meanwhile, Sherry the new Pinkette agrees to help Iris uncover how to use the relic she found during a raid of a facility belonging to the Diablo cult. Back in the city, Kageno and company arrive at their destination only to find a Disney World long queue. While they wait for their turn, Kageno takes a look around and finds that this new store is eerily similar to the stuff he remembers from his past life. Suddenly, a hottie shows up and takes Kageno away for a survey, making the other two wonder when his lame ass became such a chick magnet. This little hottie leads him through the store, and brings Kageno to a lavish dream house up on the roof, where he finds one of his 7 shadows, Gamma. She reveals that she used all the knowledge he passed on to her to create this superstore that is making her millions, making him wonder how some mindless crap he spouted a while back to appear cool turned into this slice of heaven. However, since Gamma is a genius, it really wasn't much of a surprise. Later, she asks Kageno to take the throne she has prepared for him but trips on her way, and does a spectacular faceplant. As he settles on that pedestal, Kageno's inner child squeals at how he feels like a king, but he acts like a tough jock and rewards all his subjects with a sparkling shower since his broke ass can't afford anything else. Gamma, who like every girl is satisfied with his bare minimum, calls it the best day of her life and shows him the 1 billion gold coins she has pulled in revenue. Kageno breaks into a cold sweat since he has never seen so much money in his life, but he tries to act all cool and asks Gamma about the recent copycat incidents. Gamma presents him with a theory that makes him wonder if the one behind it is Alexia, given her history of violence with him. When Kageno takes his leave, Gamma introduces him to New, one of the newest additions in her chick club, and assigns her to assist him. Before leaving, Kageno asks Gamma to give him 3 packs of chocolates and even grabs a few coins to bump up his tax bracket. That night, while he and his pals return to the dorm, Kageno senses something amiss nearby, and uses the call of nature as an excuse to go investigate. However, what he discovers proves he's just another idiot, putting on a show. Instead of Alexia playing Shadow Garden, he finds that she's being hunted by an unknown imposter who claims to be them. Instead of helping her right away, Kageno, being the gentleman that he is, sits back and enjoys the show while the damsel deals with multiple vigilantes at once. Just when things are about to get out of hand, he intervenes and starts punching their tickets. Alexia notes the huge difference in their power levels, yet it doesn't sit right with her leftist sensibilities, and she asks him why he doesn't use his power for the greater good. Kageno tells her to save her morality speech for someone who cares and bounces right before she collapses. He then hunts down the other poser thugs and hands the last one over to New for interrogation. When news about their death reaches the enemy's headquarters, their leader, who is definitely a goblin slayer fanatic, tells his minions to prioritize retrieving the stolen relic instead of holding their funerals. Later, as Alexia tells Iris about the fake Shadow Garden, Iris tells her she cares about neither the cult nor the underworld but wants to protect her own kingdom. The following day, Kageno and the 2 idiots play Confessing to Hot Chicks round 2, and although both the losers get beaten by the girls' boyfriends, Kageno's Riz captures Sherry's heart when he drops his box of chocolates on her just to get it over with. Later, her Delulu ass fantasizes about a future with Kageno while eating the sweets.
Wow, that was fast!
And her adoptive father calls it love at first sight. And believes Kageno must be crazy about Sherry to bring her something so expensive. The following day, New slides into the school as an undercover student and informs Kageno that the lunatic they captured hasn't spoken up about the copycat Shadow Garden yet. She further explains how most of the cult followers have been drugged and brainwashed, except Rex, who is their only named soldier. Kageno, who is done with all this bullshit, believes there's a bigger reason why these imposters are posing as his organization, and tells New to investigate. Later, his idiot friends reveal to Kageno that they have entered him in the upcoming Bushin festival so he can get popular with the ladies and help bed one of them too. During the festival, Claire smokes some weaklings to release her pent-up frustration while the certified side characters try to make a fortune from gambling. However, to no avail. As their bank accounts quickly run into the red, Kageno faces Rose, a warrior princess in his first match, and realizes he has to get his ass whooped if he wants to win the best side character award. They charge at each other as the match begins, and although Kageno has multiple possibilities to strike Rose, he chooses to swallow some fake blood and get smoked. As he plummets to the ground, the referee announces Rose as the winner, only for Kageno to stand back up and claim he can fight some more. Rose defeats him once again, but he keeps standing back up like some emo amped side character with a sad backstory and earns Rose's respect. She eventually uses her secret power move to finally defeat him, but ends up joining his simp club. After he is taken to the infirmary and bandaged like a mummy, a starry-eyed Sherry shows up before him and takes him out on a date. She offers him some handmade cookies while Kageno wonders how he ended up on this rom-com path again. Sherry, who believes he wants to marry her, tells Kageno she'd rather start as friends before sleeping together. Just as he agrees to that, she brings out her adoptive father, who is the head of the kingdom's research department. At this point, Kageno realizes he has messed up by getting tangled with potential main characters and decides to take a few days off. That evening, Sherry can't help but fantasize about Kageno again and later visits Alexia to inquire about her relationship with him, simply because she's jealous. After learning that they have broken up, Sherry delightfully announces she can freely date him now, much to Alexia's displeasure. Since she still likes Kageno, Alexia gets a seizure from imagining those two together but pretends to be a tough, cold-hearted bitch. A few days later, as Kageno rejoins school, Rose shows up to their class and talks about some upcoming election. Meanwhile, the Goblin Slayer copycat uses an antique relic to cast a barrier around the school. Kageno realizes something is off, but when he tries to use his magic, he finds that it doesn't work. Right then, the cult's hooded vigilantes break into their classroom and tell everyone to get on their knees, only for Rose to refuse. She pulls out her sword and tries to act like a hero. However, she has no idea her magic won't work on the opponent. So, right before she gets slashed, Kageno jumps in and shields her, only to be discarded as a side piece himself. On the bright side, Rose's delusions swell and she starts believing he is so into her that he would lay down his life for her. Although everyone believes he's done for, Kageno is just thrilled to finally have terrorist attack stories to flex for his grandchildren. Later, as the cult's leader rounds up all the students in the auditorium, and his lackeys search for the relic in Sherry's possession, Kageno comes back to life and finds a way to use his magic by releasing it in small amounts. Meanwhile, just as Sherry finally figures out how to decode the relic, the nut job, Rex breaks into her room through the window and tells her he's here to steal the relic for his boss in exchange for being allowed to wreak as much havoc as he can. He swings his sword at her, and just as he thinks she's game over, her guard dog shows up and claims he can whoop his weak ass. As Sherry escapes and leaves everything to him, Kageno observes the chaos from the rooftop, typical for a powerful Dark Lord. He is disgusted that these copycats attacked in broad daylight despite calling themselves shadows. He further notices all their methods are exactly by the book, and they've clustered all the hostages in an auditorium, where he assumes their leader must be. However, since striking in the daylight isn't his style, Kageno sticks to attacking them from the shadows and takes them out one by one. Suddenly, he finds the pink idiot running around the hallways completely exposed and secretly saves her dumb by wiping out each of the enemy who gets too close. When it's time to finally make his appearance, he shows up as her knight in shining armor and catches her as she trips. Surprised to see the blood stain on his clothes, she asks if he needs to be rushed to a hospital, but he acts tough and instead lectures her about her carelessness. They later head to safety in her dad's office, where Kageno realizes Sherry is the MC of this arc but wonders where her token psychic is. Later, Miss Smarty Pants tells him about the relic the enemy is using to block their magic and shows him that the one she has can be used to block its effects. She also explains how the relic only absorbs the magic it has been exposed to, and Kageno realizes that is why he can use small frequency magic, since it's practically undetectable. Upon learning that the relic can only function in places where magic energy is concentrated, Kageno figures that the relic must be in the auditorium, and the two form a tag team to first decode the relic and second stop the Goblin Slayer's grand scheme. as Kageno goes back to her study to retrieve the instruments for the first part of their plan. The cult leader trash talks Rex about how he had one job and not having the second artifact is ruining the whole big grand finale. Rex tells him he needs to watch his own back since half of his army has already been wiped out before he heads back to find Sherry. However, as soon as he gets back inside the building, his minions disappear, and Kageno greets him with a punch to his very punchable face. Since he can't see Kageno thanks to his speed, this wimp casts a magic net around himself to keep him at bay, only to find Kageno right in the heart of his defenses. As this self-proclaimed supervillain turns into Kageno's soccer ball, he ends up in a chapel full of the corpses of his comrades and begins to lose his shit. Right then, Kageno appears from behind him and adds him to his deadman's party. Meanwhile, Nu gathers info in Sherry's office. She finds one of her guards there who happens to be her ex-fiancé. Still frosty about their breakup, she pulls out a blade and contemplates finishing him off only to be interrupted by Kageno, who is there to gather instruments to tune the relic. Nu informs him that his girlies have already infiltrated the school and will be ready to attack as soon as he signals them, and Kageno tells her to do nothing until the relic is all tuned up. Later, while Sherry finally finds her groove, the students locked up in the auditorium begin to grow restless. The knights under Iris's command hesitate to break in because they suspect there might be more rats within the building, while Nu signals Gamma to stay put. Rose, on the other hand, worries they would still pretty much fail before the evil cult lord even if they stage an attack. Back in Daddy's office, Sherry manages to activate the relic and takes Kageno to the auditorium via a secret passage her father told her about. His cinephile ass loves the thrill of playing James Bond, but Sherry is reminded of how brutally her mother was unalived in there by none other than her shithead adoptive father, a dark secret she was just too young to piece together. After Sherry heads to the auditorium via this pathway, some of the captors start sniping a few of the students out of boredom, a sight that amuses their sadistic psycho leader. However, the wimp Rose refuses to take action because she's too busy pissing herself. Sherry watches all this bloodshed and in a fit of rage, throws the relic up in the air. It instantly reacts to the one in the cult leader's hand and it brings down the barrier. With their magic back in action, Rose takes down a bandit and tells the others to attack. As chaos ensues, both teams come at each other's throats and Rose struggles against the number of attackers targeting her. However, just as she thinks she's cooked, Kageno makes yet another cool entrance and praises Rose's swordsmanship. She is too caught in the moment to recognize he's the loser Kageno plays at school. Meanwhile, Kageno and company overwhelm the cult with their power, so much so that the wimpy leader tries to flee. Kageno notices this, but before he can pursue him, the shithead sets the entire school on fire. After Rose barely evacuates the students, Iris finally shows up but still proves to be just as useless. On the other hand, Sherry tries to look for her father but to no avail. Meanwhile, the cult leader heads to the office and starts to set the books on fire. It turns out that the Goblin Slayer wannabe was Sherry's shithead father all along, something that Kageno already guessed. When asked about why he's doing this, like every villain ever, he recites his sob story. It turns out that he was once at the top of the sword fighting game, but an injury knocked him off the charts. Now he's salty about this and is basically throwing a tantrum. This shameless guy even goes on to boast how he got rid of Sherry's mother simply because her dumb was getting in his way, and later invites Kageno to a battle when he makes it clear he doesn't give two shits about him or his past. One move from the edgy old man sends Kageno to the afterlife, only for him to be resurrected as the evil Dark Lord he truly is. Witnessing his unparalleled riz, the man realizes he'd be done for unless he uses the power-up. Once he's lit up, he turns into Voldemort with hair, but Kageno simply stands and dodges all his attacks, and eventually cuts him all up. As he meets the same end as Sherry's mother, the dumb Pinkette walks in and loses her mind, mourning the douchebag that orphaned her in the first place. Meanwhile, Kageno walks away without telling her the truth. The following day, Kageno becomes an international villain on the front page news, something that doesn't sit right with Alpha and the rest of the girl squad. Meanwhile, Sherry approaches him as their racist school finally closes for good and reveals that she's leaving for another city to focus on her research. When Kageno asks why so, she says it's a secret, and the two bid farewell to each other. Over the next few days, Kageno enjoys his life of solitude after evading his pestering sister, and receives a letter from Alpha inviting him to a holy land somewhere. Meanwhile, his gang of simps extends to the literal half-bitch Delta and Epsilon, who doesn't believe flat is justice. In fact, with the slimy power Kageno granted her, she turns her plums into watermelons to give Beta's curves some competition. This natural beauty, on the other hand, spends her time writing young novel fanfiction with Kageno as the male lead of her dreams. However, when she hits writer's block, Beta is left with no choice but to head outside and face Epsilon in a battle of assets. Unfortunately, since being slimy isn't Epsilon's #1 quality, she uses her nasty, personality to argue that Kageno has been thirsting after her more often than Epsilon, simply thanks to her juicier melons. Although Beta doesn't agree, their argument is cut short when Nu shows up and informs them of news from Alpha. Back in town, Gamma meets with Iris and Alexia at her department store and helps them shop for Alexia's upcoming guest appearance at a competition in the Holy Land. Being hospitable, she also lets them suck on some premium chocolate balls.
What a forward young man you are! My goodness!
And later helps Alexia pick out some hot undergarments from her panty haven. However, Iris believes Alexia shouldn't be exposing so much of her skin, making Alexia convince her otherwise by showing off her perfectly plump peaches and rizzing her up against the wall. On the other hand, the newest addition to Kageno's fan club, Rose accompanies him to the Holy Land while fantasizing about saving him from an arsonist's attack and giving him her whole heart. However, Kageno isn't all that interested in the latest side piece and eventually pushes her away for his much-needed personal space, while her Delulu continues to go on and on about their upcoming grand wedding ceremony. And 3 future kids, Kageno researches the local religion, the divine teachings, and its beliefs about the 3 legendary heroes who descended to the Holy Land years ago. When they reach the Holy Land, Rose takes Kageno to a local market where he finds a keychain symbolizing how the greatest of the 3 heroes, Olivier, cut off Diablo's left arm. She also informs him that this legendary hand has been sealed in the ruins of some place called the Sanctuary nearby, and later takes him on a book haul. To Kageno's surprise, her favorite rom-com author turns out to be Beta, who is currently selling a pirated version of the Cinderella story for millions. He still gets her autograph, but then begins to wonder why he never thought to use his own knowledge from his former world to make money, unlike Gamma and Beta. Later, as he compares her autograph with Rose's, they realize Beta has written his in an ancient language that Kageno somehow covers up. Meanwhile, an edgier version of Alpha infiltrates the local church, only to find that the Archbishop has been eliminated, along with his minions. This makes her question what he was hiding, but she leaves and narrowly escapes capture. At night, Kageno watches over the city like some supervillain while he innocently eats some ice cream, and later turns completely sadistic as he uses the ice cream stick to slice an imposter in 2. Right then, Epsilon shows up and tries to get his attention by showing off her bouncy melons.
Stop it! Get some help.
However, the tough guy is more interested in getting information on their ongoing mission than some slime implants. After hearing her report, Kageno says he'll carry out his side of the mission however he wants and leaves. The next evening, he heads to the local hot springs to enjoy some peace away from his oppressive fangirls, only to find the pioneer of his harem soaking at the same hot spring. Although Kageno completely ignores her existence, Alexia can't believe her luck for crossing paths with him all but naked after buying all those expensive panties. However, being a cultured woman, she also can't help but ogle at his physique and says she's glad he's alive after getting injured so badly. While attempting to continue their small talk, Alexia reveals she's in the Holy Land to attend the upcoming goddess's trial and learns Kageno is only here as an accidental tourist without actually knowing anything about the event. She explains that the chosen warriors basically summon strong warriors from the past and fight them, something that Kageno isn't all that interested in. Realizing this, Alexia mentions she's disappointed in how her juicy assets aren't winning any of his attention, and Kageno explains he likes to keep his eyes to himself at hot springs. Then, he asks her to stop ogling his Excalibur. Alexia mocks him for being delusional and calling his measly worm an Excalibur. However, she's instantly proven wrong when he stands up and flashes his sausage at her. After he leaves, the poor girl is left distraught and questions her entire existence. The next day, as the trial begins, the new Archbishop kickstarts the ceremony with a long, boring speech while Alexia internally curses the Baldy for ignoring the previous bishop's death almost as if it never happened. She further recalls how he cancelled their inspection and humiliated her just hours ago, which further infuriates her. However, her attention immediately gets stolen by Beta, or rather her huge plot cannons, when she's introduced as the guest of honor following the success of her novels. Expectedly, the crowd roars when she bends down and flashes her assets while Alexia's insecure ass feels mad about not receiving the same treatment. Beta's petty jealousy toward Alexia for being Kageno's ex doesn't help either, and the bad blood between the ladies becomes obvious very early on. Their bickering fades into the background when Rose is introduced, right after which the trial begins. The puny first contender, who looks like he hasn't worked out a day in his life, calls out to the ancient warriors only for no one to answer his calls. As he drags his weak ass back to the chambers, an arrogant sturdy knight takes his spot, only to meet the same fate. Meanwhile, Kogeno watches this from the stage and imagines himself making a flashy entrance in the middle of the game like every edgy weeb ever. He also struggles with wanting to take the field to clap everyone's asses and needing to sit back and play the best extra he possibly can. However, his fantasy turns to dust when the announcer suddenly calls out his name as one of the participants.
No. No way. No.
Meanwhile, his ladies infiltrate the entire city to get info, and to stay stationed at their specific locations. Back at the Coliseum, everyone trash talks Kogeno and expects him to be yet another wimp who'd only get smoked by the ghosts, making him struggle between wanting to run away and embarrass himself later, and staying and exposing his identity. Eventually, he decides to distract the audience with a flash of light and makes his appearance as his shady alter ego, completely sure it'll boost the show's views. After spouting his typical introductory BS, Kogeno summons an ancient ghost to fight him while the ugly Baldy believes he's too cocky for his own good. However, he eats his words just as the door to heaven opens right on top of the stadium and a hot baddie appears before Kogeno is his opponent. This intimidating lady happens to be the Witch of Calamity, Aurora, who long ago wreaked havoc throughout heaven and earth. Beta, who watches this from the mezzanine, pulls out a notebook from her safe spot and asks the cultured, disgusting Baldy to fill her in with more information while the other two girls roll their eyes at her shamelessness. However, thanks to this very shamelessness, the Baldy explains how dangerous the witch is and how slim the chances of Kogeno's survival are, only for Alexia to contradict him. Being a certified simp, she believes that this trial only summons those who are equal in strength to the opponent, which is why Kogeno should be able to hold his ground against Aurora. On the other hand, Kogeno feels sparks flying between the two of them as the butterflies in his stomach tell him Aurora feels the same way about their battle that he does. Believing that combat is just another way of holding a conversation, Aurora fires her first shot, which Kogeno easily evades. Although the ugly Baldy believes Kogeno is losing, his fangirls believe he's doing just fine, considering how easily he's evading the attacks. Meanwhile, Kogeno continues to simp after the baddie and eventually smashes her strongest blood web to smithereens, ending the battle right after he slashes through her. Aurora, on the other hand, feels happy about dying because she understands Kogeno's love language, but mainly because she's a masochist. As Kogeno flees after his mic drop moment, the barrier around the Coliseum suddenly breaks and a weird magic gate splits open, thanks to Alpha and Co.'s efforts. Elsewhere, Kogeno praises himself for putting on such a great show when suddenly, a similar magic gate opens up in front of him. However, since he doesn't want any more drama for today, he chooses to ignore it, only for the gate to follow him around until he gives in and steps into it. Back in the Coliseum, everyone worries about why this is happening when the bald Pope explains that the sanctuary may have responded to Kogeno's immense power. He further says that the gate only opens when somebody seeks it and that it doesn't need to be manifested physically. He then orders everyone to evacuate the building just as the door begins to open. However, before the ladies can leave, Kogeno's gang shows up and asks everyone to behave. Epsilon takes out all of the Baldy's guards as Alpha and Delta step into the gate too. Epsilon, who's the only one left behind, captures the Baldy in hopes of dragging him along and threatens to slice Beta's neck with her sword if either of the princesses tries anything fishy. However, since she has a kink for swords, Beta only makes happy noises while Alexia believes she couldn't care less whether she lives or not. Suddenly, a masked assassin shows up and slices through her fake melons.
I know, right? It's so embarrassing.
Completely pushing her buttons. On top of it all, Beta's assets bounce right before her eyes, making her realize she can't get exposed just yet. With the power of slime, she reclaims her womanhood before completely annihilating the assassin. The psycho then makes sure nobody saw her flat board and drags the Baldy through the door, right after which, Beta is pulled in two. Alexia and Rose, the only two left behind, also refuse to become side characters and jump into the gate right before it disappears for good. On the other side, the two crash on top of Beta, and Alexia uses this chance to make sure her meaty assets aren't as fake as Epsilon's.
Nice.
Right then, the ruthless Alpha arrives and allows everyone to do whatever they want to. As they move deeper into the sanctuary, Alpha reveals to everyone that the history of Diablos that they know of is as fake as world politics. In fact, the hero Olivier, whose statue they find inside the sanctuary was a woman who happened to have the exact same face as Alpha. In a fit of rage, the Pope calls her a failed experiment, confirming Epsilon's suspicions about the cult's dark history. Alexia, whose dumbass couldn't pass 3rd grade math, follows Alpha through the next door to find the truth, only for the elf to disappear together with the image of Olivier. Meanwhile, Kogeno finds his beloved eye candy as he walks in and asks whether it was her who summoned him. Aurora, who is tied to a chair, denies this and asks if he can help untie her. Kogeno pulls out his sword and slashes through her straitjacket, leaving her fully exposed for fan service. After she puts on her magic clothes, she asks Kogeno to team up with her so they can escape this memory prison. When Kogeno asks how they'll do it, she says they only need to break its magic core, after which the entire sanctuary would cease to exist. However, the problem is that they cannot use magic since they are close to the heart of this prison, but Kogeno says he'll manage just fine without it. On the other hand, Alexia and the others watch Olivier's memories to learn how the cult gathered orphans as guinea pigs in the past to perform experiments on and turn them into creatures with both the heroes and Diablos' blood. Meanwhile, Kogeno and Aurora's venture leads them to a greenhouse where they find young Aurora crying. Kogeno asks the reason behind it, but the witch believes she probably just pissed her pants at that time. She then slaps herself to break the memory and they manage to move on to the next one. Back at the laboratory, Alpha explains how Olivier was just one of the many children they implanted the demon's cells into, but the Baddie reasons that they did it because they needed someone strong to counter Diablos' attack if he were ever to strike. Alpha doesn't buy his shit and explains how the mission they later assigned Olivier wasn't to take down the demon but to extract more cells from him in order to further the church's experiments. As this memory breaks, they move on to a battlefield where a bunch of weaklings attack the demon at once and manage to steal his arm, something they used in the past to start their drug production. The next memory brings them to the heart of the sanctuary where the demon's arm is sealed, and Alpha explains how the cult later perfected the drugs to create an elixir for immortality. However, since they could only create one demon pill a month and, to gain immortality, needed to consume it at least once a year, only 12 people could have it. In another twist of fate, it turns out that the Pope is one of those 12 shitheads who are still alive thanks to the drugs. Alpha believes they still need to perfect the drug to fix the side effects such as hair loss.
Say my name.
For which they need people from Olivier's bloodline, such as herself. Hearing this, the Baddie finally shows his true colors and breaks free from the restraints, only for Delta to impale him and throw him into the water below them. Epsilon lectures her about being dumb enough to off him before getting information, but Alpha believes he is still alive. True to her suspicion, the worm jumps out with a blob of meat pushing him, and separates the group in two, bringing Alpha, Beta, and Delta to a fighting ground where he flashes his Walmart bodysuit. He immediately uses multi-shadow clone jutsu to increase his manpower, but Delta's crazy ass still claps him. However, she soon learns that her magic is vanishing, and the Baddie announces it's because they are at the center of the sanctuary that their magic is being sealed while his magic is multiplying. Delta, on the other hand, isn't half impressed and charges at him with full force. Meanwhile, as Kogeno kills time with Aurora, the two end up being tossed onto the battlefield with the witch landing right on top of his cake. After she helps him up, they find yet another version of baby Aurora crying in the middle of nowhere, and Aurora decides to shut her up for good this time. With Kogeno's Excalibur, she tries to unalive her, only to be attacked by some ugly, disgusting zombies. Kogeno steps in to save her just in time and later slaughters the Walking Dead army, earning Aurora's praises. He then attacks baby Aurora to break this memory as well. On the other hand, Epsilon ventures into the sanctuary and discovers a library where she and her pals research past experiments. Assuming they won't be able to retain the info or take the books back with them, the girls take pictures of the pages when suddenly, their clothes start disappearing, probably for more fan service. Just as Epsilon assumes it's because they can't use their magic properly. Her blobs of slime also retire from her chest and she makes sure the others never speak of it again. Meanwhile, as Aurora and Kogeno end up near the magic core, Delta's slime outfit slims down to a bikini, and yet continues to overpower the Baddie, only for him to continue multiplying in number, thinking he can win. However, Delta's psycho ass still annihilates him and manages to break the memory, as the Baddie pisses his pants before Alpha and asks how 100 of his clones could so easily be defeated. She says that 0 multiplied by any number is still 0, which was the IQ of each of his clones. Meanwhile, Kogeno and Aurora discover a magic sword that is supposed to break the chains to unlock the core. However, When Kageno attempts to pull out, it rejects him since he isn't the chosen one. With nothing else to do, they give up and decide to just chill. On the other hand, the fat scaredy cat summons Olivier to fight Alpha, but they leave before the fight even begins as their objective of gaining information has been achieved. Just then, the Pope receives info that the core has been infiltrated and comes after the intruders. Meanwhile, Kageno asks Aurora why she wants to disappear, something that'll happen once they break the core. She explains that repeatedly living the painful memories from her past is a little too much for her, and she'd rather break free from them. Kageno nods, calculating that the protagonist of the story must be making his appearance in a bit, only to be utterly disappointed when the Baddie shows up instead. He refuses to let either of the two escape and sends Olivier to finish them both. Aurora, who is aware of how strong she is, asks Kageno to leave, but he refuses, knowing full well that plot armor will save his ass either way. As the battle begins, Olivier's ultra-fast speed begins to pound him hard, something that only makes him grin from the excitement. The hero even manages to slash his arm, but Kageno still refuses to fight back because Olivier lacks a heart. And fighting without a heart-to-heart conversation just isn't his cup of tea. Just as he's about to get beaten again, Aurora steps in and asks him to leave, thanking Kageno for all that he has done for her, only for the Baddie to make fun of how a witch is trying to play the heroine. After hearing some more of their bull crap, Kageno refuses to be treated like some damsel in distress, only to be fatally attacked by Olivier. However, since he planned to get attacked like this, Kageno uses the narrowed distance between himself and Olivier to pull her close and leave a hickey on her neck to make her disappear. Seeing this absolute horror, the Pope asks how Kageno could survive being stabbed in the gut, and he explains he can shift his organs using magic to avoid getting critical hits. This tactic allows him to close the gap between his opponents and himself and counterattack in the best way possible. The Pope asks whether he's right in the head before launching his second counterattack with 100 copies of Olivier. However, even this time around, Kageno uses one swift move to finish them all, just as his magic returns. He explains he solidified his magic until it couldn't get absorbed into the surroundings anymore and finally managed to manipulate it right now. Pissed off, the Baddie orders even more Olivier clones to attack him, only for him to mop the floor with them. Finally, he uses his atomic energy manipulation to launch his final attack, only to be stabbed in the heart by Olivier. However, this still doesn't faze him and he manages to destroy the entire sanctuary, including the magic core. Meanwhile, his baddies watch this scene from afar. Sometime later, Kageno wakes up in a garden with his head lying on Aurora's lap and explains to her how he shifted his heart to the right side to survive the attack. Unaware of how medical sciences work, she calls him amusing, only to realize she has started to disappear. In her dying moments, she confesses it was she who summoned him because she wanted to disappear and forget everything. However, now that she has met him, she doesn't want to forget the time she spent with him. Kageno also thanks her for giving him a good time as she caresses his lips and kisses him, before turning into stardust. Meanwhile, as Alexia and the girls wander through the forest, Alexia whines about how weak and worthless she felt throughout this arc, and Rose agrees with her, complaining about how they still know nothing about either the cult or Kageno's syndicate. Beta asks what she plans to do about it, only for Alexia to suggest that the three of them form their own girl squad and gather information they might later be able to use. Beta believes Alexia is too stupid to play any form of Sherlock Holmes but still joins her. Meanwhile, Alpha learns that the core, the sword, and the sanctuary were all wiped out by Kageno and simps after how badass he is. She further approves of Beta infiltrating Alexia's wannabe girl group and later breaks the unfathomable news of Aurora's true identity. It turns out that Kageno had just made out with the demon Diablos itself, but Alpha decides to keep it from him, assuming that he already knows. Sometime later, Gamma buys an expensive property loaded with petroleum for a cheap price in hopes of expanding her business, while Delta goes off on her own playing a werewolf. Meanwhile, Alexia informs Iris about how the Church of Divine Teachings has been involved with the demon's cult and asks that she eliminate them entirely, but Iris refuses, reasoning that she doesn't have enough influence just yet to convince their father, the king. To gain this influence, however, she wants to participate in an upcoming festival, something that Alexia is worried about, given both the cult and Shadow Garden's antics. Iris is Delulu, on the other hand, says her sword will be undefeated against both these organizations. She also believes that the attacks launched by both Shadow and Alpha were thanks to artifacts and not their real strength. At the same time, as Rose practices her swordsmanship, her heart suddenly hurts and she finds a weird pattern marking her chest. A few days later, as the legendary Bushin Festival begins, Kageno observes all the losers participating in it from a skyscraper and calculates who would win and who wouldn't. He also fantasizes about crossing out another move from his wish list, aka playing a weak, good-for-nothing side character who is actually crazy strong. To make it come true, he visits Gamma and asks that she help him disguise himself to enter the festival. When she asks him why, he refuses to expose his weird fetishes and tells her not to question him. After this, she brings out all the cosplays in her arsenal and uses some 16th century cosmetic surgery magic to change the shape of his face. He chooses to play an insanely mediocre guy who seems like he hasn't smiled in a few hundred years, and hunches his back to show his lack of confidence. On the first day of the festival, an overconfident purple hair in some pristine armor, who happens to be the champion of the decade, stops him in his tracks and tells him to forfeit the match since he's a weakling who would never win.
I'm impressed.
Kageno ignores her warning but feels butterflies in his stomach upon realizing that his disguise is working perfectly. However, this annoying bitch isn't alone and has a bunch of simps following after her, one of whom is a musclehead who is not the brightest. Although one look at him tells Kageno he's the king of losers, this guy thinks he's something and tells Kageno to do as Anaros suggests. This allows Kageno drop a devastating line when he claims he's at least stronger than this guy, only to set him off. In a fit of rage, he punches Kageno and sends him flying, but he appears unharmed and calls him a weakling. This triggers a vein to pop and he pounds him into the ground, only to stop when Anaros intervenes. Thinking he has learned his lesson, she tells Kageno to forfeit now, only to be surprised to see him uninjured. This forces her to apologize to him for not holding back the muscle head earlier, but Kageno calls her a pretentious bitch who should mind her own business. Later, as he waits in a line just outside the festival grounds, he flashes weird poses out on the streets, wondering if he has claimed his spot as the dark horse just yet, and recalls the day before.
Look at this dude.
While they had some lunch, his lame friend, Skell, from school told him the favorite to win this year was probably Princess Iris. On his way back home, he came across Rose, who told him she'd be returning home for a bit to finally get engaged to her potential fiancé, a Mr. Perv at. She further discussed how Alexia and Beta do not get along together at all, and Kageno assumes it's because both of them are equally freaky and annoying. Before she left, Kageno offered her a burger he bought from takeout and told her to relax as she is way too uptight. Touched, Rose requested that he believe in her and the fact that she'll serve the people of her kingdom well, and Kageno agreed. Back in the present, he watches the first round of the festival with his slow-witted classmate who is wasting all his money by placing bets on losers. Just then, Goldie, the unbeaten champion of the last decade, posts up his freak show in front of Skell and shows off his glittery ass, claiming he can judge all the participants by the look on their faces. When it's Kageno's turn, he claims that he only has about 30 units of strength compared to the 13 he assigns to his buff opponent. However, he ends up eating his words when the buff guy trips and falls over his own feet, and Kageno becomes the winner. In reality, it was Kageno who punched him in the face, only that he did it so fast that no one could see a thing. Anaros, on the other hand, saw a glimpse of what happened and realized her pea-sized brain just couldn't fathom this anomaly. The following morning, Skell shows up to Kageno's inn uninvited, with the groundbreaking news of Rose's disappearance. Back in their room, Alexia and Beta also learn of the news that Rose stabbed her fiancé before fleeing. And although Beta wants them to proceed with caution, given the status of her fiancé, Alexia's impulse is jump right in and rescue her before she's locked up for her crime. In fact, when Beta argues against her idiotic and reckless plans, she grabs her by the collar and threatens to annihilate her as if she could. As soon as Alexia leaves after throwing her childish tantrum, Beta asks her subordinate to keep tabs on Rose's location. Meanwhile, Kageno reads news about Rose's departure and swoons over how cool it is to run away after stabbing somebody, especially your at fiancé. When it's his turn to fight, he leaves the stadium but comes across a hooded bombshell who stops him and asks why he smells of elf. Kageno honestly says he does have elf friends, making her ask if any of them look like her. As she removes her hood, Kageno realizes she's the spitting image of Alpha but lies that she doesn't resemble anyone he knows. To test if he's an evil lord in disguise or just a plain loser, the diva swings her sword at him, only for him to cower like a bona fide wimp would. As this lame move puts her worries to rest, she helps him up and tells him he'll become super strong someday. Meanwhile, the muscle head from before and the spoiled, cocky bitch try to figure out the secret behind Kageno's hidden strength, but the jock says it's purely coincidental while Anaros believes he knows what he's doing. As the match between Goldie and Kageno begins, Anaros reveals that this James Charles wannabe isn't actually unbeaten, because he forfeits the matches with opponents he believes he can't beat, despite being fairly strong. On the other hand, Goldie charges at Kageno with his thick and long Excalibur, something he miraculously dodges while cracking his neck. This pisses off the glamour boy and he delivers an emotional speech about Kageno's lack expression, hoping it would provide him with some plot armor. However, even as he unleashes his secret, powerful move in the very next moment, Kageno sneezes and knocks him out, winning this round too. Elsewhere, Iris meets with Mr. Attat and Rose's father about her disappearance and offers assistance. However, Attat uses her handling of Alexia's kidnapping as leverage to state that they'd rather deal with the disappearance as a family matter without involving their neighboring kingdoms. While his audacity pisses her off, Iris notices that he isn't as injured or stabbed in the guts as the papers suggested and that Rose's father isn't in his complete senses for some reason. Meanwhile, Anna Rose apologizes to Kageno for underestimating him but claims she's still too strong for him to beat in the next round. Kageno, who has been practicing this since the time he watched Naruto, whispers to her that he's warning her for the last time before taking off the weights on his arms and dropping them like he's the biggest Rock Lee fanatic. This understandably stuns Anna Rose, but she still believes she'll win, something that Kageno doesn't give two shits about. On the other hand, Rose is being hunted by her own knights while she ventures through the underground sewer system of her city, trying to save herself. The following day, Skell shows up uninvited at Kageno's room and pesters him to look for Rose since her kingdom has announced hefty rewards for whoever finds her, with which he could use for his foolproof betting scheme. Kageno doesn't want to move an inch, but then he catches sight of his sister walking toward his house. He instantly changes his mind and flees with Skell. On his way to find Rose, Kageno hears a piano sonata being played that he dearly loved in his previous life and suspects that somebody else besides him got resurrected. To find out who it is, he walks into the auditorium playing this piece, only to find that it's Epsilon plagiarizing Beethoven's creation and his ideas once again. Disappointed but not surprised, Kageno recalls being forced to take piano lessons as a kid when all he wanted to do was run around in the neighborhood with plastic guns and play a street ruffian. This changed when he discovered a tune called Moonlight Sonata and began yearning to play this in the background while achieving world dominance one day. Back in the present, after giving Kageno an eargasm with this melody, Epsilon thanks him for showing up, in exchange for which he praises her outfit and how well it fits her curves. Leaving her flustered, he walks out of the room and decides to steal the piano put out on display at the Music Academy.
What? Why? Why?
Meanwhile, as Alexia and Beta try to look for Rose, she seeks refuge in the stinky sewers after being completely cooked from all the consecutive fights with the knights and running away. Additionally, as the wound on her chest begins to grow, she realizes she's about to be possessed. In her final moments, she recalls her last meeting with her fiancé, during which she realized that her father was high on some green leaves and under the Attat's control, which forced her to pull her sword on him. Although the blade barely cut him, her own men instantly turned against her and she had no choice but to flee. Just as she wallows in her misery all the more, a beautiful melody catches her attention and she realizes it's Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, her favorite piece. Seeking to discover who's playing it, she finds Kageno finally fulfilling his dream of playing in his edgy alter ego with this dark music in the background. Like a mindless fangirl, she begins to clap for him, only for Kageno to question why she's here. This inspires her to spill her sob story and how she wanted to protect everyone but couldn't. After hearing this, Kageno grants her a piece of his magic and tells her to continue to fight, right before he vanishes in style. As the wound on her chest instantly heals, some masked vigilantes surround her, only for Rose to defeat them all in one swift move. Now that she has Kageno's strength. Feeling this immense release of magical power, Alexia and Beta locate her only for Rose to ask that they leave her alone. As Beta realizes this bitch has inherited Kageno's contagious edginess along with his strength, Alexia reminds her of the promise they made to support each other. However, Rose is too cool to talk to her right now, so they instead engage in a fight, only for her to kick Alexia's ass. After leaving her with Beta, Rose finally leaves the sewer to officially become a rogue vigilante. On the other hand, Kageno returns to his dorm only to find Claire waiting for him at the door, and she doesn't seem too happy about him making her wait. Sure enough, she drags him back home and sits on top of him, choking him for making her wait for so long, making him wonder what kind of kink this is. She further elaborates and whines about Kageno not accompanying her to the countryside during their summer break, and gives him a 5 to 1p ticket to the Bushin Festival, telling him to attend it if he wants to make up for his broken promise. As he barely survives his sister's antics, Alexia discovers that Beta has left the city too. The following day, the semi-finals of the Bushin Festival begin, and Kageno heads to the 5 to 1p section, only to find Iris occupying the spot next to him. She doesn't instantly recognize him, but when he mentions Claire, she realizes he's the same kid they groundlessly tortured when that good-for-nothing Alexia was captured. Realizing her mistake, she apologizes to him for the misconduct of her knights, making Kongeno bite his lip out of fear that this special treatment might ruin how hard he has worked to stay on the sidelines. She further wishes he would stay friends with her sister as he was, but Kongeno explains he was merely sucking up to her for money. Right then, the others ask Iris who she is rooting for in this match, and she mentions Anaros. This makes Kongeno curious about what they feel about his character, so he asks what they think about him, only to learn they think he's just a nobody who acts cool because he's got some speed. This makes him realize he could have had an Academy Award if he tried to in his previous life, and he excuses himself to join his next match. On his way to the changing room, Kongeno comes across the elf from before who he now knows is the Queen of Fencing, Beatrix. This startles him a little, but she merely asks him about Alpha again and exchanges her hamburger with the one he bought before. On the other hand, Mr. That shows up to spoil the mood and asks her who she thinks will win the next round, Anaros or the mundane guy. Although Iris acknowledges Anaros' strength, she mentions the confidence she sees in Kogeno's eyes and believes there's a slim chance he might give her a run for her money. True to her word, as the battle begins, Anaros' arrogance once again misjudges him and believes she'll win just as long as she can offset his speed. However, even with repeated attacks, she fails to break his defenses. Then it's Kogeno's turn to mop the floor with her. He appears in her blind spot and slices through her shoulder, breaking her armor and finishing her in one swift move. Mr. on the other hand, pisses his pants after witnessing Kogeno's immense power, and wants to either recruit him to the demon's cult or wipe him out. After some time, the loser bitch approaches Kogeno and apologizes for underestimating him, and admits she has been an arrogant prick. Kogeno also acknowledges her strength and shakes hands with her before leaving quietly. Meanwhile, after winning her next match fair and square, Iris spots Beatrix and invites her to become her guest during the next match. The Elven Queen of Hotness, on the other hand, offers her a hamburger in return.
Burger.
On the day of the finals, Kogeno enjoys some princess treatment in the VIP section when Iris shows up to annoy him. She asks how he's drinking coffee so easily when she can't do so because it's bitter. To get this conversation over with, he suggests she add lots of milk and sugar to her coffee. After doing so, she does enjoy the drink while horrifying the self-righteous coffee puritans around the world. Just as they enjoy their coffee in silence and Kogeno feels like a celebrity, Beatrix shows up, but the guards refuse to allow her inside with her weapon. Iris immediately intervenes, and after she reveals her identity, everyone who was previously looking down on her immediately changes their tune and sucks up to her. However, her undivided attention is on Kogeno, the chick magnet whom she believes will become stronger in the future, despite everyone else's doubts. Meanwhile, Mr. doses Rose's father, the king, before bringing him to the ceremony to make sure he listens to all of his commands. This shithead's real goal, however, is to assassinate Iris's father, the king of their neighboring kingdom, to start a war between the two and allow the demon cult to flourish in the meantime and attack when both the kingdoms are at their weakest. However, given just how convincing Kogeno's measly new identity is, he's currently shitting his pants, wondering what he might do if a war were to break out here and now. As soon as Mr. reaches the royal booth with the king, Beatrix smells the drug on the king and mentions how much he stinks, triggering Asshat's sensitive ass. Just as he begins thrashing her, Iris intervenes and warns him about who he's messing with. Upon learning that he's up against a legendary warrior, the spineless schemer flees with his tail between his legs. He then realizes he now has one more problem to deal with if he wants to please the demon he's currently serving. Soon enough, the final match between Iris and Kogeno begins, and with her first glance, she can see just how strong he truly is. She also realizes that no one has seen the full extent of his power yet, and plans to finish him before that gets unveiled. With this plan in place, she pulls her sword and aims to finish him in one swift move. However, just as she moves, she envisions Kogeno lopping her head right off and becomes completely paralyzed. Confused and wondering whether there's a bug in the matrix, she tries again, only to imagine her leg flying off this time. Almost as if he's awakened his Sharingan, Kogeno continues to show her visions of her defeat. Meanwhile, Rose moves toward the VIP section, only to discover that all the cult members have been wiped out. It turns out that it was the work of Shadow Garden, and they implore her to move forward with her mission. Back in the arena, Iris continues to fall back without attacking, and the crowd begins to trash talk her, forcing her to charge forward. However, even this time, a vision stops her in her tracks and Kageno uses this opening to plummet her into the ground. As she gets whooped in front of the whole kingdom, her disappointed father leaves the booth. And while Asshat freaks over just how strong Kageno is, but before he can do anything about that, the bigger problem, aka Rose, shows up and apologizes to her father for all the things she has done. The old guy, who is supposed to be possessed, responds to his daughter's apology and forgives her, pissing Asshat off. Right then, Rose draws her sword and charges him, but he uses the sick old man to shield himself, whom Rose stabs in the process. Remorseless, she decides to slice her neck in half later, revealing that it has been her plan all along to end the royal bloodline so Asshat can't abuse them to wage wars anymore. However, before she can do that, Kageno steps in and reveals his identity as Shadow, whom Rose finally recognizes as the bandit from her past who saved her life. After she confesses to being his biggest fangirl, Rose leaves the stadium and Kageno points his sword at her shithead fiancé, only for Beatrix to step in and take him head on. As mayhem breaks out, Iris's father ponders whether to implement martial law and asks his men to follow the runaway Asshat. On the other hand, while Kageno and Beatrix clash swords, the truth about his real identity pisses Iris off for the sake of drama and she swears to finish him with her own strength. On the other hand, Beatrix struggles to keep up with Kageno's supersonic speed and bites the dust every time she tries to land a hit. Right then, Iris shows up with a cheat code up her sleeve in the shape of an artifact, only for Kageno to mock her for being so weak as to need a crutch. This blows her fuse and she fires off her first attack, which Kageno dodges as if it's child's play, all the while evading Beatrix's attacks. Meanwhile, Rose comes across Alpha, who offers her two choices. One, that she joins them, proves herself worthy, and saves her kingdom, or two, goes off on a solo ride that is bound for doom. The princess thinks hard for a moment but eventually chooses the first one, officially becoming a part of the Shadow Garden. Meanwhile, the girls take Kageno to the streets since that's where he belongs, but even after they launch attack after attack, Kageno evades them all. Eventually, he gets his hands on a pair of crowbars, his favorite weapon, and clashes with them on a moving train, easily holding the upper hand. While Beatrix stays calm and collected, Iris's psycho ass continues to hurt Kageno's ears, so he finally shuts her up with a kick to her ugly face. With her gone, Beatrix uses a powerful strike to slice through Kageno's crowbars, only for him to switch back to his real weapon, the slime sword. With this, he feels invincible and tells Beatrix that her magic energy is lacking, which is why she won't win. Right then, the animalistic mad woman jumps at Kageno with yet another fireball, only for him to survive it almost as if he's heat resistant. This pisses her off even more and she makes a two-step plan with Beatrix to take him down, only to be kicked in the chin and walked all over. However, even after tasting the most bitter form of defeat, Iris still pretends she has the stronger hand and threatens him with the fact that all the forces in the kingdom have been deployed after him and that he has nowhere left to run. Her shameless audacity makes Kageno laugh out loud as he wonders why he should be the one running away. And from what? Considering even the princess is no more than a prideful little girl. With this, he gives them a taste of his atomic power and spreads his magic throughout the city, threatening its entire existence. However, he spares them in the end and vanishes. Suffering from such disrespect makes Iris lose her mind and she cries out on her knees while Beatrix watches her calmly. A few days later, the news about this incident gets printed in the papers and Kageno gets labeled as the demon of the century. Meanwhile, Asshat gets reprimanded by the higher-ups of the demon cult for letting Rose get away, but he promises to capture her as soon as he catches sight of her. On the other hand, Rose gets welcomed to the training grounds of the Shadow Garden, where the first step to learning is how to become a stripper. After she's stripped of her name, status, and even her clothes, she is also forced to let go of all her memories, including that of Kageno, which doesn't do her too well emotionally. Meanwhile, Kageno plays his favorite sonata in secret, content that he has finally checked off the last things from his bucket list. This is where our Sonata of Delusion ends. Thanks for sticking around until the end, you absolute legend. Comment perv asshat down below to let us know you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, and click on the screen to watch some of our other exciting videos. Until next time, stay awesome, stay Annie Geek.